Hi, I'm the PASCO product specialist here at AVA, and what we're going to do for the next few minutes is just play around with the CO2 sensor. It's one of my favorite sensors. It certainly has introduced a lot of biology teachers to using sensor technology because measuring CO2 is obviously a very good thing, a very useful thing to measure if you're interested in respiration or photosynthesis and a variety of other metabolic activity, that kind of thing. And so it's a very, very interesting sensor. And I guess what's also interesting is the different ways that you can experiment with it. There's not just one way of doing an experiment. I know that you may have a specific activity that you do a certain way. We all have our favorite experiments, but I find that the CO2 really lends itself to experimentation. So what I'm going to show you today is something actually I've never done before. It's a new experiment, and I think it's going to work. So I'm kind of excited to show it because it's the first time. What I wanted to do, a couple of things. The first part of the experiment is I'm just going to take a two-hole rubber stopper here, and I'm going to put it in, block it in there, and it's a two-hole rubber stopper. This is going to allow me to breathe in, and then I've got the second hole that's going to allow the air that's currently in this container to go out. And of course, there's a big hole here, but that's going to be plugged with a CO2 sensor. All right. And so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take a breath, and I'm going to blow in. And then I'm going to still hold my breath. I'm not going to completely evacuate my lungs of air. I'm still going to, and there won't be a lot of talking. Hopefully, maybe the wizard who's going to put this video together will get rid of some of that empty space. But there'll be a period where I'm not going to be talking because I'm going to be holding my breath. We're going to be measuring the CO2 level. Then what I'm going to do is the remaining air that's in my lungs, I'm going to breathe out, all right, and displace the air that's in there. And then it's going to be, basically the air that's in the bottom of my lungs that have been sitting there for a while. And we're going to see what that has. And we're going to be plotting at the same time. So we're going to see whether the CO2 level goes up, how much further it goes up, or whether it goes down. And then after that, we're going to do a second activity that will be related to the first. All right. So to get started, I've got a CO2 sensor here that I've already connected to the software. So I'm going to get right at it, and I'm going to click on that icon there. That will allow me to bring up a graph that will have CO2 against time. And so I've got that. As such, I'm going to just sort of wave this around here, make sure that there's, it's starting fairly fresh. All right, and I'm going to place the CO2 sensor in the jar, and I'm going to hit start, and we're going to start collecting. So looking at the screen here, it's dropping down a little bit, and we're at about 1156, which is fairly high, but that's because we're in a contained room here. If we were to go outside, the CO2 level would be about 400 parts per million. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take a deep breath, and I'm going to then exhale about half of the volume that's in my lungs. And then I'm going to wait a few minutes until it settles, or a few seconds until it settles. I'm not going to take a breath in between. And then once I see the CO2 level settle down, I'm going to exhale the remainder that's in my breath. All right, so here it goes. Oh, I'm still here. So this is kind of interesting and not entirely unexpected, I suppose, but you can see here quite dramatically that my CO2 levels if I look on here, they topped up here around about 1600. They were still going up a little bit, but I was about to faint, and so I thought I had to carry on before it completely flattened out. But then I exhaled the last half of my lungs, and it went from 1600 parts per million all the way up to about 50,000 parts per million. So, you know, demonstrating, okay, what's going on here. This is kind of interesting, all right? So obviously the air that was in my lungs, there was a greater exchange of gases, and then therefore, you know, the CO2 levels were higher. And what I wonder though, and what's kind of interesting, and what I want to examine, and this is the new part, or this is something that I've never done before that I think is kind of interesting, is, okay, well, what if I do the experiment again, okay, I'm gonna hit stop. Okay, I do the experiment again, but this time I breathe out half my lungs just into the air, exhale, and then the remainder of the air that's in my lungs, I breathe right into this chamber, and I don't wait. So what I'm trying to see here is this increase, you know, is it a function of the amount of time I held that extra air, or is it a function that was the bottom of my lungs? And that was the air that got exchanged. And, you know, I'll be interested to see what the results are. All right. So, all right.
I think you're good to go.
All right. All right. So we've got the CO2 sensor back down to around where it was before. And now what we're going to do is we're going to do the same experiment. I'm going to hit start. I'm going to take a deep breath, and then I'm going to exhale half my lungs just to the surrounding air, and then I'm going to breathe into the chamber, and let's see what happens. Okay, so I'm going to try to match it up so the starting point is right here around the 50 seconds or maybe a little bit before. We can bring that data up and show it at the same time. So it's plotting. It's about at the same level. I'm not going to wait the full 50 seconds. But what I'm going to do is there we go, a few more seconds, just so that it makes it easier to look at the data. And now I'm ready to go. Well, that's kind of interesting. So what we have there is the bottom of my lungs. And it's probably not going to go up nearly quite as high as the other one, but it's pretty close to as far as the other one. So it's clearly the bottom of my lungs had a greater exchange of gas. Because it's much higher. This is not just marginally higher; it's much higher. So I think it shows quite conclusively that there's very little exchange, or much less exchange, of the oxygen, you know, higher up in my lungs. Because that first part was when I, you know, just the blue line, this blue line here. That's when I there was, you know, blew from the, you know, a full set of lungs, and this is when I blew after I had already purged a fair bit of the air out of my lungs. So I think that's kind of interesting. I don't know about you, but I think it's interesting. And that's the first time I've ever done this experiment. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you very much.